Good Tuesday afternoon to you. Hope you're having a great day. Thanks for joining us on Sports4CLE. Plenty to talk about. A little later in the show, Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com, will join us. We'll talk plenty about the Cavs getting ready for the second half of the season, trying to lock up one of those top 6 spots so they avoid the play-in tournament in the NBA. And we begin by talking Browns. Some news on social media from Jarvis Landry. First, let's take a listen. Jarvis Landry, Instagram.
You're not where you want to be. You feel like you're supposed to be somewhere else. You said it. Well, say you could snap your fingers and be wherever you wanted to be. I bet you'd still feel this way. Not in the right place. The point is, you can't get so hung up on where you'd rather be that you forget how to make the most of where you are.
What are you telling me?
Take a break from worrying about what you can't control. Live a little.
Live a little.
All right, now what does that mean? Let's take a look at Jarvis Landry's Twitter, and we will see. Reality behind all this is I came back to play into play in the best shape of my life. Got hurt in week 2, high-grade MCL sprain, partial quad tear, bone bruise. Came back way too early. Never heard me mention anything about it. That is all very true. Media availability didn't happen because I was focused on getting in the field as healthy as possible during the week. Strategic plan set aside that I followed. Put the ball in Cleveland's court by telling them I would like to stay. But if not, then have to put the ball in Cleveland's court. I'm confident enough in myself to be better, healthier this year, and moving forward to help do my part winning a championship elsewhere. With that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik, reporter for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. And Tim, it was pretty evident that Jarvis Landry was never healthy. Just your thoughts on what has hit social media from Jarvis today.
Yeah, I think it's become kind of a pattern when it comes to the Browns this past season of guys, playing through injuries and then becoming worse. I mean, there's Baker with the shoulder, Jedrick Wills with the ankle, now Jarvis Landry with what happened with what he revealed this morning, the MCL. Obviously, it shows. I mean, I'll give the Browns players credit for fighting through those injuries, but it was a pattern, I think, that just showed that those guys were clearly injured. Maybe they were rushed too early, and it's odd that kind of happened after a training camp in which, Kevin Stefanski and company were very conservative about holding guys out. If there was any tweak, any nick or whatever, they would hold them out of practice for a few days. And then in the season, they were willing to let guys play through injury as opposed to sitting them, getting them the proper rest they needed, and getting healthy for the long run. So in regards to Jarvis Landry, obviously he's never really played through injury. This is basically the first time in his career he's dealt with any sort of significant injury that held him back for multiple games. He had been very reliable, earlier in his first couple of years of the Browns. Obviously, he was a key part of the team, and you could just tell all season that he just wasn't right. He just wasn't himself. And I think, that injury revelation, I think, says a lot about it. And I mean, you do have to give him, Baker, and Jedrick credit for playing through the injuries, but at some point, it becomes a problem. And when you're playing several limited players on top of all the other problems the Browns had on offense, it's going to add up and it's going to lead to a lot of problems. And, the product on the field suffering as we saw towards the end of the season.
Is it a concern that, clearly, and I get it, football, you play through injuries, but there has to be a time where you say, man, no, you're not near healthy enough to play. You saw it with Baker. You mentioned Jedrick. You also, Jarvis Landry. Those are 3 guys that are important, especially the passing game. Is that a concern? Is that something that the Browns have to look at internally, do you think?
I think that's got to be part of the growth of Kevin Stefanski going into year 3 is, I mean, what football player is going to say that they're not healthy enough to go? I mean, every football player is very tough. I mean, you got to be tough to play football. It is a collision sport where guys are flying into each other at 20 plus miles an hour at times at full speed. So of course they're going to be tough. Of course they're going to play through anything, but as a coach, as an organization, at some point you got to protect the player from himself. And I think that was kind of the thing with Baker. And you saw that how that just continued to add up for him as the season went on and on and on. And, his play deteriorated more and more. Jedrick Wills, he left 3 consecutive games in the middle of the game because he couldn't keep going on that ankle when he probably needed a few weeks off the ankle to rest it. And Jarvis Landry, him being banged up obviously wasn't good. We saw just how, he lost the step because of those injuries. And so many guys got hurt. It just wasn't good injury management on the part of the Browns. And that's something I think that Kevin Stefanski, hopefully for the Browns, will be able to learn and go into the season understanding that sometimes he has to be the bad guy and tell guys, no, you can't play. You're not going to be able to help this team. And that there's if you're injured, what'd be better, 10 games of a guy who's maybe 60% or 6 games of that same guy who's 100% at the end of the season when those games can really matter more. So that's got to be something the Browns really look at and improve those things. I think John Johnson said something similar at the end of the season, talking about how they really need to kind of address those sort of things as far as health and sports science are concerned.
Yeah, and I've been saying pretty much all off season, Jarvis played on a leg and a half. He was never, since week 2, he was never anywhere near 100%. All right, time for us to head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one about Jarvis Landry.
I was just wondering about the cap hit that they would take if we kept Landry. And do you think we should keep Landry as a safety valve for Baker Mayfield? And how much would it affect the cap? And what can we do with the money if we were to let Landry go?
All right, so let's take a look at this. And again, it's a large salary figure for the final year. This would be from Pro Football Focus. The cap savings would be $14.879 million and some change. You would only take a $1.5 million cap hit because his total salary is $16.3 million. There are other cap candidates. Austin Hooper, Case Keenum, those would save some money as well if the Browns decided to cut them. But specifically to Jarvis Landry, if you can extend him at a lower dollar figure, maybe get him more guaranteed money over 2 or 3 years, I would absolutely do it. I don't know that you can tie up $16 million. I don't know that certainly you can. I don't know it's wise to tie up $16+ million for a guy that doesn't play outside. And what could you do with the cap savings? You could spend it on a number 1 that plays outside or on an edge rusher to be complementary to Myles Garrett. Those would be the 2 areas. Just your thoughts.
Yeah, I think obviously, if you're going to bring Jarvis, you got to bring him back at a lower amount because this team needs to get more dynamic at the receiver position in terms of explosiveness, in terms of guys who can stretch the field, make things happen after a catch. And Jarvis Landry has been a very reliable receiver. He's just not a big play guy. He's a guy that you can get the ball to a ton of times. He'll rack up some yards. He'll keep drives going, and that's Jarvis Landry's game. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. He's made a very nice career out of that. But if the Browns choose to move him, almost $15 million, you can obviously turn around and use that money to re-sign Jadeveon Clowney to have that to keep him around for a few years, 4 to 5 year 1-2 punch a defensive end, and really be able to continue doing those things that you were able to do if you're the Browns with Myles and Jadeveon together. It just comes down to, spending money at the position. We've talked about the overhauling of the receiver room, how that needs to happen, that needs to be a thing. And it's not even just Jarvis's money. I was doing the math myself with Case Keenum. If the Browns move on from him, that's about $7.1 million of cap savings if they move on from him. And Austin Hooper is going to be the interesting one as well. After June 1st, you're talking about a cap savings from $2 million if the Browns move on from him before June 1st to $9.5 million after June 1st. So there's going to be some tough decisions to make for the Browns, but it's just going to come down to how they feel they can shape the receiver room. Can they be more dynamic? And what precedence does that take over making sure you have a good number 2 guy opposite Myles Garrett. Those are tough decisions to make, but those are the ones the Browns got to make if they want to kind of stay where they are and try and get back to the playoffs, among other decisions they have to make.
And before we go to break, let's be clear about this. Jarvis Landry is an outstanding blocker, a good guy in the locker room, has been one of the guys that has helped change the culture. So he's not a problem. The question is, and he says he wants to be here. If he wants to be here and they can make it work financially, I'm guessing the Browns will find a way to do it. But again, it can't be at a $16 million a year cap figure. Tim Bielek and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we will take a look at some of the targets in free agency. We'll also see how the Browns shape up in terms of salary cap available to improve the roster. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Life is getting back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tri-c.edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for spring classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielek from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one about adding to this team.
I've seen, and maybe just as a fan base, we talked all offseason about Baker, the weapons, the fancy the offense. I have a question about the defense. I understand we have to try to re-sign Clowney, and I hope we can re-sign him at a number that the Browns think is enticing. Do you think that we need to make a splash at linebacker or defensive tackle? The Browns got ran on, and I personally don't like the play of our linebacking core. What do you guys think about the defensive tackle position in the linebacking core? Thank you. Have a nice day.
All right. Certainly appreciate all of the voicemails. Tim, when you look at it, they certainly need defensive tackles. There aren't very many of them on the roster. Linebackers, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is going to be a guy that continues to grow. Still don't have a real good read on Jacob Phillips. They spent a third-round pick on him. But defensive tackle, they need to go find a couple.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, that's the biggest need. I always go back to, how the New England Patriots just ran wild on the Browns because they didn't have that interior presence. The Browns didn't defensively to really take that run game away. So they really need to beef up there. It's actually interesting. I was reading an article this morning from Pro Football Network. They were talking about why DJ Jones of the San Francisco 49ers would have been a good fit for the Cleveland Browns. And I ended up looking up his numbers. He has a really good Pro Football Focus grade of 73.2, playing on the same line as Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead. That's a really good defensive line for the 49ers. And he seemed like he played a really good part in that, very good grades in both the run game and the pass game. And he's got an interesting body type, 6 foot, 321 pounds, pretty much a leverage guy. And I think that's a very fascinating thing, very fascinating guy to keep an eye on. Not necessarily as highly regarded as some of the other guys you're going to find in free agency, but that just seems like the way Andrew Berry likes to operate. Get a splashy guy early, like we've seen the last couple of years, and then kind of strike a little bit more in the second tier guys. I'd kind of keep an eye on DJ Jones.
Yeah, I would think if we've learned one thing, that's kind of the MO for Andrew Berry. He'll find the area that he thinks needs to be upgraded significantly. It was Conklin 2 years ago, Johnson last year, and then he just kind of filled it in with one-year deals and guys that just seemed to fit with what they were trying to do. Okay, Pro Football Focus. This is the salary cap tracker, all 32 teams ranked by salary cap space. Dolphins have the most, over $63 million. Jaguars just under 60. Take a look at the Bengals. I'm guessing the Bengals are going to go spend some money on some offensive linemen, especially tackles here in the offseason. Browns still middle of the pack, doing pretty well with $25 million available in cap space. And that means they have the ability to go and do some things in free agency that we're talking about. It's not, the Saints are $70 million over the cap, so that's a team to watch some names for. But the Browns have been very cognizant under Andrew Berry of making sure that they're in a good situation cap-wise, and they need to be because there's areas they need to upgrade.
No question about it. I mean, you got to save that money, some money, just in case they make the big swing for a quarterback, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. You got to have cap space available just in case for that. And if you don't get one of those guys, you still have a little money to work with to, get some more pieces on offense. We talked about Jarvis Landry, cutting him could free up about $15 million. So that suddenly brings that number up from 25 to 40. And with that, you can get a really quality piece in free agency. Like I said, either bringing back to David Clowney or signing a top-notch wide receiver. It just kind of comes down to money management. Every team in the NFL has to kind of deal with this sort of thing. But, with the new deals going on with streaming, with Amazon, cap space might not be as much of an issue because I expect that cap's just going to go up and up and up and up as we in the next few years. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how these teams kind of play around with the space. And we've seen Andrew Berry be pretty aggressive in free agency, and he's gotten guys for relatively pretty good value throughout. So I'm kind of curious how Andrew Berry is going to attack this free agency.
Yeah, and again, that gets underway in 3 weeks. It's the 16th of March is the beginning of the league year when they can start talking to free agents. All right, this one again, also from Pro Football Focus. Trades to watch out for. There are 15 of them. One of them involves the Browns, and it has the Browns trading a 5th-round pick to the Washington Commanders for Matt Ioannidis, a defensive tackle. His inherited contract, 1 year, $6.9 million. And he is a guy that has played 3-4 years in the NFL. So it's interesting to see again. It's a way of improving your interior defensive line, which Browns need to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a smart value. I mean, we've seen the Rams, for the past few years trade picks like crazy to get veterans, and Matt Ioannidis, not exactly, a superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but, still a very good piece on that Washington defense. I'm just looking at his numbers from last season. 38 tackles, 2.5 sacks, pretty solid season at defensive tackle, PFF grade. His PFF grade has constantly been hanging around the mid to high 60s, even got into the low 70s. So he's been a stable, solid player, not necessarily a Pro Bowl type, but, with Garrett and potentially Jadeveon Clowney back, I don't think you need a Pro Bowler at the position. You need a guy who's going to be steady, who can, hold his ground, who can occasionally get some pressure from the interior to make life even easier for Clowney and Garrett, to create more havoc. You just need a steady presence. I think Ioannidis is a guy who can certainly do those things.
All right, so with the cap space the Browns have, one of the areas they're going to look for, wide receiver. Let's take a look at some of the best available wide receivers. And again, we have seen these names. The PFF ranking is in parentheses after the team. So we did a thing last week, Tim. The highest level of wide receivers, free agent wide receivers, don't ever perform well. Nobody's gone, of the last 16, 2 of them have been over, and that's $8 million or more per season. Only 2 of them have had over 1,000 yards receiving. None of them have had 8 or more touchdowns. when you look at that group, if you're going to go second level, Kirk and Chark are the two that intrigue me if you can get them at a decent cost per season.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think those guys are pretty solid number 2 guys. Chark, I think he's still got some athletic potential to be a number 1 guy. We just haven't seen it in Jacksonville just because they've had quarterback problems for pretty much Chark's entire career in Jacksonville. And Christian Kirk, like I said, very reliable number 2 guy. He's not a bigger guy. He's not one of the bigger receivers, but he's productive. He can get you 700 to 900 yards a season, a handful of touchdowns. Productive in the punt return game as well. And I mean, that's something the Browns have needed for a while. They haven't had, a dynamic punt returner for quite a few years. So, I mean, if you can get a guy who could pull double duty there to at least fill a spot, in your receiver depth chart while you remake it and while you look to the draft for potentially, your future number 1, or you try to restack it. With the number of options the Browns have in the draft, I guess it does make sense to kind of aim for a number 2, or at least a guy who in the interim, while whoever they draft is kind of developing, growing just a little bit more. Maybe they become the number 1 for a little bit before they kind of slide down. So it's going to be interesting how that plays out. I don't know if they would go big game hunting and try to get a guy like Chris Godwin or Mike Williams, who I think would be a really good fit, because I think, a 6'4" receiver to put alongside Baker Mayfield. I don't think that's a guy Baker has had a receiver. Just put a really tall guy out there, a guy that's much easier for Mayfield to see. That would make a lot of sense. But again, it just depends on if they'd be willing to spend that money to get one of those big name receivers.
Yeah, and it did surprise me that top flight receivers in the past 6 years, the high name ones that have been signed as free agents have not produced at the level you would think. That did surprise me. All right, Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we take a look at another potential trade, and we'll also hear from Aaron Rodgers. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Tim Bielik and I continue to talk Browns. 15 NFL quarterback trade candidates, this according to Spot Rack. Baker Mayfield, one of them. You see the cap hit, $18.85 million. Injuries and consistent play have Baker's future in question. Still should be considered the starting quarterback for 2022 as of now. Most likely scenario, Browns try to reel in one of the big fish, Rodgers, Wilson, Watson, but failed to do so. Run it back with Mayfield for 2022. Slight trade possibility. Cleveland trades quarterback Mayfield to a quarterback-needy franchise. Tampa Bay, Indianapolis, there's a number of them this year. And then they have Case Keenum take the reins in 2022. I don't see that happening. If Tim, I think if the Browns were as enthralled with Case Keenum, he'd have played last year. That, to me, tells me he's more likely to not be back than be the starter. What are your thoughts? Certainly Andrew Berry has to try to exhaust any possibility to get better at quarterback. Your thoughts on just them getting one of those big-name guys?
Well, I think when it comes to, who's going to start a quarterback next season, I think Baker Mayfield kind of has to be the bottom of like the worst starter you got. If he's out of the options they get, if you don't get anybody better, then you start Baker. I don't think you can go from Baker to Keenum unless you're planning on going for one of those quarterbacks in the 2023 draft, like Bryce Young, like CJ Stroud, like Jake Haener from Washington. I don't think you can afford to do that, especially when you got a roster that outside of quarterback is one of the better rosters in football. So if you're going to make that upgrade to quarterback, you got to know it's a clear upgrade. I've been saying that for weeks, that if you're moving on from Baker, you got to get a better guy And I mean, he's part of Baker as a part of a trade package should at least be a little interesting. I'm curious what kind of his value would be as far as like in a trade for Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers. You know, could he substitute a first round pick or 2 picks in there or whatever? That value fascinates me, but I agree. I think it's more likely. I think that it's far more likely. I mean, that Baker or one of those better veterans that they could trade for is to start in 2022 than Case Keenum. The only way they would go with Case Keenum is if they decide to kind of blow it up and try and hope they can get high enough in the draft to get one of those studs at quarterback that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and again, I think the as you pointed out, the rest of the roster is that's not something I think they're going to do. So Aaron Rodgers made some news yesterday with a heartfelt reminiscing of his time with the Packers on Instagram. So everybody was thinking, yeah, the announcement's coming. Aaron Rodgers then appeared on the Pat McAfee show today. Here's Aaron Rodgers.
Now that we're a couple weeks removed from the season, you've won your second MVP. You look back on the entire year that was. Your just thoughts now that you're a little bit away from it. Is there any different thoughts than you had maybe a couple weeks ago after we talked about your loss?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, let me just put this disclaimer out right away for the few people watching that are tuning in just for a specific maybe news or decision. There will be no news today, no decision on my future. As I was texting with you yesterday, I just got out of a 12-day Panchakarma. Look that up. I know you did after we talked. But it's a cleanse that originated in India. It's been going on for thousands of years, and it's something I've done in the off season. So I'm just getting my head above the sand now and seeing what's going on out there. But no decision about my future today. So all you just do
hold
for
on,
that.
No, hold on. Hold on. Fresh out of the Panchakarma, you had to think about your decision. Now, obviously, no decision is being made, and that is 100% okay. And by the way, your life, your world, people are going to be mad at you for it because they were expecting it. That's on them, not on you. But have you thought about that anymore? I assume that has to be all you're thinking about, or no, are you trying to compartmentalize everything?
All I'm thinking about? No, buddy. There's other things going on, like doing Panchakarma.
Okay, Tim, so I know you're dying to know. What is a Panchakarma? We're going to tell you what a Panchakarma is. There you go. Cleansing of the body, 5 in number. The Panchakarma treatment is unique in the sense that it includes preventative, curative, promotive actions for various diseases. And ironically, there's a place in Lakewood that you can get the Panchakarma done. One of only 3 we found when you could Google it. So if Aaron Rodgers is big on Panchakarma, Browns are the place to be. We've got one in Lakewood. In all seriousness, he doesn't seem like he's going anywhere, to be honest with you. I think it's most likely he ends up back in Green Bay.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he just goes anywhere else. I do think, it might be best for everybody involved. I would imagine if he made a decision before free agency opens up, so he can give Green Bay at least, an idea of, okay, he's not coming back. They would have to trade him or he's staying, and they have to figure out how to manipulate the cap to try and bring Devontae Adams back to keep as many of their key guys as possible and try and make another run at it. So it's tricky. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is kind of at the point of his career where maybe he's earned the right somewhat to kind of take his time a little bit and make those decisions, maybe a little LeBron-like in how he's kind of doing all this, being a little cryptic and whatever. But, it's going to be the biggest question of the offseason until it gets answered is, what is Aaron Rodgers going to do? Obviously, he didn't announce it today. It's unclear when it's going to, be out there. But it's going to be, I think, the first big thing that really happens for a lot of the other quarterback dominoes start to fall. It's just going to be fascinating to see where he ends up, whether it's Green Bay or somewhere else.
So he's the 2-time MVP. Does that mean all quarterbacks start the Panchakarma in India?
I don't know. This is honestly the first time I've heard of it, and I've tried a couple of those interesting healing methods. I've tried cupping. I've tried acupuncture. I've tried the gua sha with just like the scraping with a stone or whatever to try and free up some muscle fibers or whatever. I have never heard of Panchakarma today. I kind of at least want to look up and see what those 5 steps are.
Yeah, I mean, again, okay, do what you do. So we're going to head to The Athletic. They predict a Jimmy Garoppolo trade. This one's kind of interesting. Brown's not involved. But the 49ers trade Garoppolo to Pittsburgh for a 4th-round pick this year, conditional 4th-round pick next year that could slide up to a 2nd-rounder. It's intriguing just because the value that it would take to get Jimmy Garoppolo, that's, to be honest with you, that's not a lot.
No, it's not. And I mean, I think, the end of the game against the Rams in the NFC Championship may have hurt his value a little bit. The fact that they had that lead and he couldn't make a play to get the job done to get San Francisco into the Super Bowl when it was right there for him, including the interception in the final 2 minutes that put the game away. But, as far as, where he could go, Pittsburgh's would not be a bad fit for Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, the Steelers have enough talent at receiver, at running back, and they have enough on the defense where they don't necessarily need a quarterback who's Superman. They need a guy who is going to be able to, be a point guard, get those guys the ball, get out of the way, and, let them do their thing. And I think that we've seen the Steelers kind of do that for the last couple of years to varying degrees of success. It was obviously good enough to get to the playoffs, even with a Ben Roethlisberger who's nowhere near his prime or his physical capabilities. So maybe if they can't get the big name, maybe if they can't trade up, to get a Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis in this draft, maybe not a bad consolation prize. And for San Francisco, just get whatever you can get. I mean, obviously 2 fourths, including one that turns into a second, is not ideal, but it's a little something, and especially if you're trying to rebuild around Trey Lance, extra pieces to kind of make sure that he's prepared, he's ready to go, and he has all the things he needs around to be successful. It's going to be interesting to see where he ends up, because we have to assume, based on, the Trey Lance pick itself, that Jimmy Garoppolo is playing elsewhere next season.
Yeah, I would agree. Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we turn our attention to the draft and some prospects the Browns might be looking at. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a line. A long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
We continue talking Browns football with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. We're going to head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. A young caller with what the Browns should do in the draft.
Hi. I was wondering, what do you think the Browns need to do for the draft? With all their picks and everything, which players do you think they should take in order to reach the Super Bowl next year?
All right. As always, we appreciate the voicemails. So, Tim, I think you and I are in agreement. The passing game needs to be upgraded significantly, and they probably need to make sure that the pass rush is as good as it was this year. If they can upgrade it a little bit, all the better. Those are the 2 areas I think they need to kind of focus on.
Absolutely. I mean, the game has kind of become, how can you help your quarterback win? Do you have a good enough passing game to win? And how can you affect the other team's quarterback with either pressure or coverage or a combination of both? So, there's a reason defensive end or edge rusher is the second most important position, behind quarterback, because you need to be able to affect those guys with pressure. And obviously, even if the Browns do bring back Jadeveon Clowney, they need a third guy. With Takk McKinley, having the torn Achilles, may not have him back in Cleveland for next season. And then receiver, I mean, we've talked about for months that this team just lacks dynamic players at the position. And you saw in the final 4 teams that got to the conference championship games, each one of them had at least one dynamic outside player that, keeps teams from playing basic man schemes, that's forcing that tilts coverage a certain way to free up things for other guys. And the Browns just simply didn't have that this past season. And that's something they really need to get in this offseason, whether it's in the draft, one guy or even 2 guys, like I've said, might not be a bad way to go, but that's a position that needs to be overhauled, along with strengthening that pass rush and making sure you have multiple guys that can, rotate it in and out and create continuous havoc.
Yeah, and, people will point to the Titans and say, well, they were the number 1 seed. A.J. Brown, Julio Jones. So that's, in my mind, that's what separates them. All right, let's get into a little bit of the names for the dynamic pass catcher. You did mock draft. Who did you have the Browns taking?
I had Treylon Burks of Arkansas going to the Browns at number 13, and this was a draft where I wanted to explore, what happens if Garrett Wilson isn't there at 13. I think that's certainly a legitimate possibility. I mean, teams like the Falcons and the Jets could use receiver help. And I think Wilson, is probably the most talented, the most ready of the receivers to kind of fill that position. Burks is pretty close because I've called him the walking mismatch because I really believe he's got those tools that it's so hard to cover one-on-one. I also just love the fact that, when you look at his numbers, he was far and away the number 1 guy in that Arkansas offense. Teams were game planning for him, and they still couldn't stop him. And I think that's significant. That tells you that teams were, trying to prepare against this team. That when they prepared against Arkansas, they knew they had to keep an eye on Treylon Burks, and that he still put up very good numbers. That tells you that tells me he can handle number 1 duty. So that sticks out to me. Hands are pretty good. Maybe he needs some refinement in his route running, but those are things that can come with time. So Treylon Burks makes sense. If they want to go Drake London from USC, I think that's also a very sensible choice. They just need to use a pick and get a very dynamic guy who's very tough to cover one-on-one. I think that's got to be a priority if they're going to go receiver at number 13.
All right, so we're going to take a look at some scouting reports for wide receivers, and we're not going to look at Wilson, Burks, some of the top 4. We're going to go to that next level. And this is from Dane Brugler, scouting reports with The Athletic. So the first guy we're going to look at, Jamison Williams. He would be in that top 4 if not for that recent ACL injury. Chance to be special as long as his knee makes a full recovery. More than just speed, tracking the ball, makes easy adjustments on the football. And again, this is a guy who he'd probably be a top 10 guy if he did not suffer the ACL injury in the championship game. Another guy, Penn State guy, so another Big Ten guy, Jahan Dotson, puts defenders in conflict with his twitchy speed, beats press, and manipulates coverages at the stem. Undersized, but above average hands, natural body control. Isn't a tackle breaker. If he was, he'd probably be up in the top, 10 or 15. But he's difficult to cover one-on-one. So when we talk about those two, Williams and Dotson, do you think the Browns can afford to take a chance on Williams? If everybody passes on him, he's available at like 24 or 25. Do you pop back in and try to grab him? Do you try to trade back into the first round?
I think it depends on, a lot of different factors. Number one, did they already take a receiver at 13, or was it a quarterback, or do they have another quarterback lined up or whatever? But I think with Jamison Williams, the thing that sticks out to me is like you said, if he's healthy, if he doesn't tear that ACL in January, or even if he tears it way back in September or in October with the draft stock he gained, he could be an interesting option. But I think with the Browns, they need a guy who can be an impact player now, not 9 months, not a season later, not, in the middle of the season. They need a guy who can hit the ground running in week 1. And it's unfortunate for Jamison Williams that he might not be that guy, depending on, his ACL recovery. I don't doubt he can recover well, because we've seen just, ACL is no longer a death sentence for guys. So many guys can come back from that injury and look like their old selves, or at least 90 to 95% of their old selves, and be very productive I don't think the Browns can afford to wait on that. And Jahan Dotson, every time you turn Penn State on, Jahan Dotson does something. He does something that sticks out as well. He's a big play waiting to happen, and he's a guy I think that I don't know, like if he's sitting there at 25 or whatever, he won't last. I don't think he'll last past Kansas City, at least at this point. But considering, that the Browns don't have a dynamic receiver and there's a bunch of those guys that are 6'1" or taller, maybe the only way you would go with him is if he somehow slides into the second round, just considering what the Browns really need the position. If they were able to somehow come away with Treylon Burks, Drake London, that first round, if the pick was either Burks or London in the second round, Jahan Dotson's there at 44, and you were able to get him, all of a sudden you go from a receiver core that's not exactly dynamic to one that has a lot of really tough weapons to stop. And then that makes life easier for the quarterback, whether it's Baker Mayfield or whoever.
All right, let's take a look at a couple of other guys that, if they're there at 44, would you be intrigued by? And this is the 47th ranked prospect by Dane Brugler of The Athletic. Jalen Tolbert from Alabama, 6'1", 195. He had scholarship offers from Power 5 programs, wanted to stay close to home. That's how he ended up at South Alabama. Doesn't have elite top-end speed, fluid footwork, slight hesitation in and out of breaks. He can mash the gas and create pockets of separation. That last little thing kind of intrigues me. And then John Michi, and you see he is only average size and speed, but an instinctive route runner who understands how to manipulate coverage and is really quarterback friendly. As long as he makes full recovery from his ACL tear, should be a quality number 2 in the NFL. If either of those guys are around in the second round, are you intrigued by him?
Tolbert interests me a little bit. I mean, South Alabama's not exactly a football powerhouse, but they're a pretty solid, at least a group of 5 program. The profile in Tolbert's interesting. You don't necessarily need to be a super fast receiver to be a very good one. You just need to be able to have gears you can shift into to create separation, a stop and go, understanding how to manipulate coverage as a route runner. Those are nuanced things. And a guy who can do those things, while he may not be the fastest, if he's fast enough, he's going to be productive. So Tolbert maybe would be an interesting guy. There's a lot of guys in that day 2 range that absolutely stand out to me. I've talked before about guys like David Bell and Wan'Dale Robinson. Those two play different games than Jalen Tolbert, but both those guys are interesting prospects. And when it comes to John Mechie, we should know by now you don't doubt receivers from Alabama. I mean, they had 4 guys go in the first round the last 2 years. Mechie, before he got injured, he was obviously very productive, and he was a big reason why Alabama won that national title in 2020. Just, he's not a number 1 guy, but in that range, maybe you're not necessarily looking for a number 1 guy. Ideally, you love to get guys who could be number 1, but you're also looking for guys who could fill roles. You want to have multiple different receivers to threaten the defense with that they have to pay attention to. And Mechie's profile seems like at least a solid second receiver who can, be productive, maybe fill a Jarvis Landry role in a way. This guy's going to rack up a lot of catches, get open, and, just be effective out there with the football. So it's just important to diversify what they have at receiver, but it's got to start with the dynamic guy. Once you get that dynamic number 1, and you can create a hierarchy behind that number 1 guy and really have a balanced receiver group that you can threaten some defenses with.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. Tim, as always, man, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
All right. Tim Bielik. Make sure you read him. Page of the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We turn our attention to the Cleveland Cavaliers. A couple of more days off during the All-Star break, then they're back at it in the Eastern Conference. Chris Fedor joins us when Sports4CLE continues. Stay with us.
Life is getting back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to try-c.edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for spring classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams, I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
Time to turn our attention to the Cavaliers. All-Star break. A couple more days, and the Cavs will get back at it Thursday against the Pistons. Cavs were the story of the first half, without question. And the NBA took notice. It was apparent during All-Star weekend.
Obviously, in finding a young star, Darius Garland, who's leading the charge, Evan Mobley. They have a great young group of guys that, they're putting it together now, but they're going to be good for years to come. And so if I had to pick a surprise, I think it's Cleveland.
They ain't never really sort of surprised teams. It's just you got a chance to play the game. Everybody says that about the Cavs or whatnot, but early in the season, I got no Darius. I coached against him when he was in high school, so I knew what they were capable of. Colin Sexton actually played in my AAU program. He's really good, but he got injured. So they just putting the pieces together and guys getting a chance to play.
I would say the Cavs or the Hornets probably, because they're mobile. You know, you got Markkanen, you got Jared, Evan Mobley, K-Love. Like, you got guys that aren't just stationary; they move. A couple of those guys can shoot. You know, Mobley can get off the rim and push it down the court. And most of them are rim protectors, so it's a lot of length and some shooting for 3 or 4 guys to be 7 feet tall.
I'll go with this city here in the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, you know, their record, you know, in the past years hasn't been great, but this year they've proven that it looks like they're going to be in the playoffs. They're a tough team to go against, a big lineup that's physical, with guards that can score. They're a team that definitely surprised a lot of people. They, you know, got a lot of people's respect early in the season.
Let's welcome in Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. And Chris, it's nice to hear some of the elite in the NBA talk that way about the Cavs. I know you wrote an article, Rebirth of Cleveland for the first time in decades. Cavaliers are creating their own legacy without LeBron. Take us through that and how nice it was to kind of celebrate NBA basketball with the Cavs kind of on the rise.
I think they've deserved it, Dave. I think that's what it comes down to. They've earned the kind of recognition that they got from all of those players there. And Eric Spoelstra, the head coach of the Miami Heat, talked glowingly about J.B. Bickerstaff. And you can tell that other people around the NBA are recognizing what the Cavs are doing. And in talking to a lot of the same players and some of the opposing coaches throughout the course of the last few days, they don't believe it's a fluke. They believe that this is just the start for this young Cavs team, that, yeah, they're here probably earlier than anybody expected. But what they're doing is sustainable if they continue down this path. Their style is sustainable. And the kind of talent that they have on this team, they feel like is only going to continue to get better. And I think that's the exciting thing when it comes to the Cavs, Dave, is that, you know, they're not doing it by just buying free agents in the offseason, right? Or making trades for win-now players toward the end of their career. It was an organic build by the Cavs, and they're just in the early stages of this ascension because Evan Mobley is going to continue to get better. Jared Allen has room to grow. Darius Garland can still get better. So how they built this thing leads you to believe that it's not just a one and done type thing.
Yeah, and all of them are ascending. They're all young. I mean, a lot of those guys, keep in mind, Mobley, 1 year of college basketball. Darius Garland had 5 college games, and I know he's played a couple of years in the league, but it's still a learning process that you can't rush. Do you get the sense they're going to continue to be patient with it? I mean, the fans, want it all right now, and it's like, let them grow the way they need to grow.
I mean, I think they're going to do whatever they think is best for the organization moving forward. But in the realm of that, I would say that of all the moves that the Cavs have made to get to this point, Dave, the one thing that they have always avoided is breaking up the core of this group or trading away a core player. They got Ricky Rubio. They didn't have to trade a core player, right? The closest that they have come to trading away a core player is Larry Nance Jr. for Lauri Markkanen, and that raised their ceiling and that made them younger and better moving forward as well. So of all these moves that they have made, they haven't had to give up Colin Sexton or Darius Garland. Now they did move some draft pick capital for Karis LeVert, and they have to figure out how he's going to fit and the best way to use him. But I would expect them to continue down this same path and continue to express the same kind of patience and continue with the same kind of plan, because really, like, there's no significant move out there. There's no blockbuster move out there for them to make to completely change this roster.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right, let's take a look at the upcoming schedule when the Cavs get back at it. And it got a little bit tougher at the trade deadline with the Sixers there, and the Raptors are playing really well. You see the Heat, the Bulls, another date with the Sixers. So it's not going to be easy, and teams are just crammed in the top 8 from the Eastern Conference, and you want to be in the top 6. So what are some of the keys to having the Cavs stay away from that play-in tournament, do you think?
I'll change your phrasing on it, Dave. Not only do you want to be in the top 6, for the Cavs, a team that has had this kind of miraculous turnaround so quickly, they have to be in the top 6. Because the worst thing for them would be to play the way that they did throughout the first half of the season, have multiple All-Stars, a 6th Man of the Year candidate, and all the good things that the Cavs have accomplished this year, and have that lead to play-in tournament. That, I think, would be pretty crushing and devastating to the Cavs. So they need top 6, and they know it. Everybody inside the organization will say it privately. It doesn't matter if it's 1, it doesn't matter if it's 2, it just has to be top 6. We cannot allow ourselves to get into the play-in tournament. But what they have to do, Dave, look, they just have to get through that stretch that you pointed to. It is not going to be an easy stretch, right? I mean, the only bad team for about 2.5 weeks is the Indiana Pacers. So, I mean, that's really, really tough. Welcome back from the All-Star break to the Cavs. And look, they're capable of doing it. They went through a grueling stretch earlier in the season where not a lot of people thought that they could be competitive, and they found a way to get over that, through it, however you want to phrase it. And they were still able to not get discouraged. And it actually, in some ways, it brought them a little bit closer as a team. So they just have to understand that if they get through that grueling stretch that you pointed to right there at the beginning of March, there are some wins waiting for them on the other side if they take advantage of it.
Yeah, agreed. Just keep doing the things that you were doing. Chris Fedor and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, we continue to talk Cavs. What do the Cavs need to do in the second half? We'll talk to Chris Fedor about that. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
On July 5th, 1947, just 11 weeks after Jackie Robinson first plays with the Dodgers, Larry Doby becomes the first African-American to play in the American League, and play Doby does. During his 13-year career, Doby clubs 253 home runs, plays in 6 All-Star games, and leads the Indians to 2 World Series. His number 14 hangs with other legends, the pride of the Cleveland Indians, Larry Doby.
We continue talking Cavs with Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. Chris, we touched on a little bit in the first segment. Is the most important thing in the second half for J.B. Bickerstaff to figure out exactly how Caris LeVert best fits into this group? Because he's a guy that can make a difference.
I think there are 2 things that they need to focus on coming out of the All-Star break, Dave. I think the first thing is they've got to find the defense from the first part of the season. Now, if you look at the overall statistics, they'll still show that the Cavs are 3rd in the NBA in defensive rating, but they're not playing like the 3rd best defense in the NBA lately. There's been some slippage on that end of the floor. Obviously, part of that has to do with the fact that they've been without Lauri Markkanen. They're no longer able to use that 3 7-footer lineup, and that changes things. You don't have the same size out there when you go with Dean Wade or Lamar Stevens or Jetty Osman. So that's part of it. There's no doubt about that. The other part of it is it's really hard to sustain great defense for 82 games in a regular season. It's hard to play at the same competitive level that the Cavs have played for all 82 games, but their identity is that defense, and they've got to find that coming out of the second half. The other thing is, yes, they've got to figure out what's best for Caris LeVert and how he can be best for the Cavs, because as much as, yes, they traded for him to help them lock into a playoff spot in the second half of the season, Caris LeVert was always a guy who the Cavs believed they needed more so in the playoffs. Things get tight, games get close, defenses know exactly what you're trying to do on the offensive end. Do you have somebody who can just create something out of nothing? Do you have somebody who can just go get you a bucket? And Caris LeVert is the kind of guy who, when everything breaks down and nothing is going right for you offensively, he can just go create something. So obviously that was a playoff pickup for the Cavs, but they need to figure out before they get to that point how he's going to be best used. Is he most comfortable coming off the bench or starting? Is he most comfortable playing alongside Darius Garland or without him? And the only way that you can answer those questions, Dave, is continue to experiment before the playoffs roll around.
So we're going to take a look at this, and this one's by the Bleacher Report. Every NBA team's biggest flight risk this offseason, and for the Cavs, they have it as Colin Sexton. And again, Chris, we've talked about it. The Cavs want to keep Colin Sexton. You see, net rating is 5. It's, all that stuff. The Cavs view him as a young guy who was averaging 24 points a game at some point. He was willing to kind of dial it back this year a little bit and do the things that they wanted. By all accounts, he's done whatever they've wanted whatever they've asked him to do. He's been the quote-unquote great teammate. So I would think a guy that can score, that's a great teammate, you generally want to keep if you can.
Yeah, I think that the key point is if you can, and what is the price that it would cost in order to retain somebody like Colin. Yeah, they like him. He was the very beginning of this rebuild. He was the first piece. He's the piece remaining, really, from the Kyrie Irving blockbuster from 2017. And he has done everything and more that they've asked of him to do. And here he is. He can't be part of this turnaround for the Cavs the way that he wants to be, and yet he's still there with his teammates. He's supporting the organization. He's working his butt off behind the scenes when it comes to his rehab. So he helps set the tone of this culture of accountability and hardworking and player development. He's at the center of all of that. The thing that they have on their side, Dave, 2 things. One is at the time that they were negotiating with Colin this past offseason, there were 4 teams that were projected to have cap space this coming off season. Now I think there are 6, and you got to say, okay, which of those 6 are really going to line up and give Colin the kind of offer that the Cavs wouldn't be willing to match, which is the second thing that the Cavs have on their side. He is a restricted free agent. And that means that if a team offers him whatever contract it is, the Cavs, it's in their power if they're going to match that contract. And coming off the season that Colin is coming off of, where he's dealing with this injury, it's a tricky injury, the Cavs are having success without him. How many teams are going to line up to give Colin Sexton $50 to $20 million per year? It just doesn't seem like that's a realistic outcome this offseason. So because of that, I think the Cavs could get him and retain him for something that's not going to really damage their flexibility moving forward from a salary cap perspective.
You know, it's a fun problem to have when you have too many good players that you're going to eventually have to pay, and that's the situation the Cavs are in. Those are the problems NBA executives sign up for all the time. Chris Fedor, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it, man. Thanks very much.
You got it, Dave. Anytime, man.
All right, Chris Fedor. Make sure you read him. Page of the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports4CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Scheduled guests, Jeff Phelps from 92.3 The Fan and Valley Sports, and Sam Amico from hoopswire.com tomorrow, 4 o'clock here on Sports4CLE. We'll see you then. Have a great night, everybody.